So glad mention has been made of Rizwan. It's lovely that we're here during the Rizwan period, and we're here in one of the great election years. The International Convention is not underway yet, but all the delegates are in Haifa, and they're making a mini pilgrimage. So they're visiting the holy places, and I'm sure you have people remembering you in prayers, because the Baha'is, some of the Baha'is, remember to pray for everybody. The 9th day of Rizwan is the morning of the 9th day of Rizwan is the day that the election takes place. It's the first act of the convention. And before that, the friends haven't seen the members of the House of Justice. So it used to be the hands of the cause were also out of sight. Everybody was out of sight. They were busy with their pilgrimage, and then they gathered there, and then the election takes place. And then the Rizwan message is released just after the election, after the voting. So you'll begin to hear that. I have people asking me, where's the Rizwan message? Why isn't it? That's why. And then in the afternoon, all the friends of the world center along with the delegates. Everyone goes to Baji for the celebration of the Rizwan feast. That's always a glorious occasion. How many of you have been in Haifa on a holy day? I know many of you have been on pilgrimage. Look at this. So you have an idea. Something of what the feeling of that is. People say, do you miss Haifa? I say, yes, I miss the shrines and I miss the holy days. But anybody with good sense doesn't miss the work. How did you do with the readings? There were a lot of readings this time. But you've got them to take home with you. You know, this is a kind of a first approach to them.
Thank you.
And if you take the whole 3 collections, I'm sorry, some of it's a little bit roughly edited. You've got some repetitions, but maybe there's some divine purpose in that. We don't know. Did you really understand this the first time? You know. This awareness of the physical world and the hereafter, that from the hereafter, once we go on the other side, what can we remember? What do we remember? And there's a number of quotations that aim at that. There's another one here, which I wanted to start with. It says, you've asked whether or not the soul after its ascension will be conscious of the physical world and that which befell it therein. Know thou that the state of the soul after death is awakening, it's like awakening from a dream. It will be conscious of all past states. So we have a complete recollection. One of the, made mention a little bit before to the subject of near-death experiences, that this is an interesting, very interesting area of study. At first it was kind of a discovery. A lot of doctors knew about it, but mostly everybody discounted the things. And the people who had such experiences would tell somebody about it, and people would look at them like they're crazy, so they just shut up about it. And now it seems, there's millions of people in America that have had near-death experiences. And of course, the modern techniques of reviving the body helps, but not as far as one can perceive from the reports of the people who've had these experiences, not the cause of their coming back. In a recent revised version of the spiritual meaning of physical reality, or the purpose of physical reality, by John Hatcher, he does a summary there of some of the things that happen to people in near-death experiences, and talks a little bit about it, and draws a parallel with the Baha'i teachings, because almost all of the major themes that those who have had such experiences report have some meaning in the writings. You find some parallel indication in the writings. It's a great world. It's a beautiful world. It's an intensity of experience. Like you have here waking up from a dream. Suddenly you're back in real life again. And this reality is so much more vivid, the people that put these reports out. recount that seeing is so much greater, hearing is so much greater. My dear wife, while in Haifa, had one of these experiences. She had double pneumonia and went over, and they asked her if she wanted to stay. They said, "You can stay, but if you want, you can go back." And she said she chose to go back, thinking of poor me, left behind. That was very kind. But there's interesting side effects of all of this. That she can hardly talk about it. As the people who report these things say, oftentimes the people, when they have a listening ear and actually somebody's interested, they start talking about it. They tear up, they weep, just to remember. What do they remember? The love. Being enfolded in love, breathing love, feeling love, being surrounded by such mercy, compassion, and love that they're just overwhelmed with it. And she says, you don't want to come back from there, obviously. But if you do come back, your life is a different life. And people report that over and over again. Because they know what's ahead, they don't fear it anymore. And because of the influence of that love, they know the most important thing they can do in this life is to be kind to people, to not miss an opportunity to serve others, to be kind to them. That's the whole essence of life. And now you think about the Baha'i teachings. What greater kindness is there than to share knowledge of the revelation of Baha'u'llah? I mean, this is like the supreme gift. And how often in the writings it says that we should be offering it like we offer a gift to a king. We're not the gift, we're just carrying it, we're offering it. And if ego gets in the way, or if feeling we're important, or in some way thinking we're better than others, are we better than others because we heard of it? And we're more fortunate than others. We're blessed, but not necessarily better. And we don't know what the judgment will be on us about what we've done with what we've heard. That's the problem. Those that haven't heard don't have that problem. We have that problem. Sometimes you hesitate telling people about the faith. I'm going to put you in big trouble today. I have a few points that I put down about these near-death experiences. The account of one's actions. Not all the people that experience it go through all these different stages, but there have been a few that have gone through a number of stages. And the stages seem to be quite parallel in character. And one of them you probably have heard of is the tunnel, that they feel after they come out of the body, they witness things in the body. And the nurse says, "We've lost him, doctor." And this is flat line. He sees the flat line, and he sees them trying to revive him, and nothing's happening. And he's telling them, "I'm all right." And they said they're not paying attention to the soul that's passed on. He's there watching, and he's telling them, I'm really dead here. What's going on? And then they get drawn into, they feel an attraction, or a light, or a need to move away from that scene. And then they enter, oftentimes they describe it as a tunnel, or at least a sequence of things that are rushing past them. And then in that there seems to be the beginning of a life review. Now, we see in the writings it says that we'll be called to account, and there will be a review of our life. In one of the Tablets of Baha'u'llah, where he's asked about the activities of the angels, there's a reference to angels with different numbers of wings in the Quran. They asked him, "What's that about?" He said, the one with the least number of wings are those angels that are assigned in noting down everything you think and do of every soul. And that's all, so it's all recorded there. Now, how it gets recorded, I mean, you say, who can write that much, but but the point is that it's inherent in creation. Everything we do leaves a mark, it leaves a trace. And we will meet those things again. And we also see the effect they describe in this experience, seeing the effect that their actions had on others. seeing those actions from the point of view of those that experienced an act of kindness to them or an act of prejudice and hatred. All comes back and accumulates. So in the end, the soul is kind of weighing the result of its actions in the course of this. That's one stage, and that has some parallel with what we know. Then, at the end of that, they feel the presence of a light, a big light. And that light is encompassing, and it's the center of attention at that point in the experience that they're having. And the light addresses them, but without words. And they understand without words what's being said. That's a mysterious way of communication. We're told how different the next world is. How do you explain that? Everybody that says there's no way to explain what happened, but this is more or less an account. Now, the accounts we've been reading here, the things we've been reading about, tell us about the next world, but they also say you can't understand it. There's no way to understand it. It's like the difference between the womb and after you're born. So this is a big difference there's no way. And he says, if you understood, and the reason the veil is there is because you would not tolerate to stay here with the rest of us. You would want to go on to that love and to that beauty. Indescribable beauty is another element that they talk about. Some accounts say how the plants and the shrubs and the flowers in that world, each blade of grass communicates meanings and significances to them. Now we know that so many of these things in the physical world, all of these physical representations around us have meanings. Baha'u'llah says we should penetrate the reality of all created things. And there's one of the promises in the other world that we will do that. So that also can happen in the other world. Mysterious kinds of things. Think of the meaning Abdu'l-Baha when he interprets dreams, what he says this means and that means. And how in dreams where there are no animals with eternal souls, yet we meet animals. We see animals that are symbolic in the other world. The horses he's talking about or something else you'll see in some of the accounts. I mentioned earlier the infinite compassion and love that they feel, the acceptance they feel, the assurance that there's forgiveness, that thank God his mercy is greater than his justice. Otherwise, we would really be in some trouble. It's just a wonderful possibility, the prospect of that. Association with loved ones. This is of any of them that had a fairly lengthy experience. There was some loved one, someone close to them, usually a relative, a blood relative, who's passed on, that welcomes them there. And they immediately recognize them. I remember my wife's cousin. She was a young woman. She had children. And she was in the last stages of cancer, dying. And it was very difficult for everybody. And her auntie died just a week before she died. And they didn't want to tell her because she was so weak, and it would have been another, they thought, another sadness for her. But as she was passing over, she's talking about seeing the loved ones, and this happens in a number of cases, and some of you will have relatives and friends who you've seen this. In the last stages of death, they begin seeing the other side to some degree and name and speak to relatives or name them by name. Oh, and this cousin greeted her aunt. She said, "Oh, you're already there." And the relatives are all saying, "Well, what's going on? How can she know these things, So there's a whole lot of mysteries about this that we don't understand. And there's a lot of people that say this is all imagination, this is a kind of a dream, this is the leftover brain cells are producing this kind of... But the people who've had the experiences say it's not that simple. It's something much deeper, something much more lasting. I know what a dream is, and when I wake up I can't always remember, and it goes away after a while. But this doesn't go away. This is a permanent kind of experience. So it's a kind of a hint or confirmation for us. And now they're collecting thousands of these cases. They're collecting them from historical literature. They're collecting them from people on other continents. The light the being of light, becomes Jesus, becomes Moses, becomes Buddha. Depending on the orientation of the person, they think that that must be Christ. When carefully questioned, the people say, well, I don't know if it was Jesus, but I think it had to be Jesus because it was so full of love. He was so full of love and so kind. Well, we know the reality of the holy manifestations of God is one reality. We have that confirmed in our teachings over and over again. So we have that to look forward to, that presence and so on. Association with the loved ones, I think, is a promise that you've seen in the writings that we've looked at today. There's a book by Eben Alexander. It's become quite a popular book. He was a neurologist who passed away for a time, and his comrades in the hospitals, the other neurologists, were trying everything they could to help him at the moment of death, and he passed on, and he had quite a long experience, and he went through different stages in the other world. And the whole time, he's dead as a doornail as far as the physical responses of his body are concerned. So where does this take place? I mentioned this terrific professor at the Pontifical University saying that stage by stage they're seeing this consciousness is something that's beyond the body, surrounds the body, but is not of the body. It's not produced by the brain. While it's in this world, its seeing into this world depends on the conditions of the brain. So you'll have people who have a stroke or something and they partially forget or they can't function. That's still now very closely associated. The soul function through the body, but that's not the only way it functions. And at some point, as we see, there's this moment of death where it breaks that and it moves on. If you haven't read any of these accounts, you may find them very encouraging, very interesting. And especially some of the arguments about of why it's irrational, or the people have made it up because they've heard of other people's experiences. The ones doing the investigations say they have certain keys. There are people that do that, but you see, there are ways of questioning and asking, and the overwhelming sincerity of the people involved with true experiences causes an effect on these authors which is very, very marked and clear. And they're scientists themselves. And they say, I came to this doubting every aspect of it and convinced to disprove it. But it doesn't do that. And look how Baha'u'llah says the dream has been left in us as a sign of how we can function independent of the body. Our eyes are closed, our ears are closed, the senses are not working, and yet we're experiencing all kinds of things in dreams. Wonderful experiences. And sometimes we have spiritual dreams and we see into the other world itself. That is possible. And Shoghi Effendi has said that it's possible to meet the souls from the other world. Sometimes they come. So I'm sure if we started having an explanation, we find people here who've dreamed of loved ones, where the loved ones have suddenly appeared to them and told them not to fret or not to worry. I met a lady, Baha'i teacher from Oregon some years ago, and she said she'd been teaching a woman the faith. And the lady liked the faith, she was reading about it, but hadn't embraced it completely. And she passed away suddenly. And she said, I was so worried about her. I was praying, praying. She says, after a week or 10 days, I had a dream. And this woman came to me and she said, not to worry, I'm all right. She said, and again, she said she's dressed in white. So many of the experiences, people are dressed in white robes. Sometimes they're luminous white robes, sometimes they're iridescent white robes, but it seems like we're going to at least have some decent clothes on the other side. Don't worry. Don't worry about your suitcase, when you want to go. So this lady said that not to worry about me, I'm fine. And I live in a beautiful place, a beautiful community with wonderful other souls. Do you remember the verse? That's the key to where you're going to end up in the next world, is like seeks like, and the company of its kind. This is the key to know where you are. What kind of people are you comfortable with? if you're youth, what kind of people are you associating with? What kind of people do you feel comfortable with? And that's when you start examining and worrying about whose company you're in. Eschew the company of the ungodly, the people that don't have spiritual aspirations, because it doesn't help you at all. Doesn't mean you want to be unkind to them, because you want to also help them if you can, but that's not always possible. So this lady said to her, she said, and also on certain occasions, your Baha'u'llah appears with the brightness of the sun on the horizon and thrills all the souls. That was the end of her dream. Can you imagine? This is the halfway lady that's got halfway to the faith, you know. Now, I don't know what the rest of us are going to experience, but maybe we'll have a chance to talk about it on another occasion. This is a very intimate story about one of the house members, Adib Tarzadeh, who wrote the Revelations of Baha'u'llah and was a very active teacher in Europe as a counselor. He was much loved by, and you have the recordings and you've heard his talks, and you can imagine why he was so loved. And it was a kind of a thrill for me. I remember I was elected to the House of Justice at the same election as Adib. And okay, I was on the teaching center, and there was some thought maybe you would be elected, and some lady, one of the very spiritual ladies at the World Center, came to my wife and said, "Get ready," to my wife, and she says, "What's she talking about?" I said, "She's crazy, don't worry about it." But she said she'd had this dream, and she'd seen Abdu'l-Baha come and take my hand and walk with me somewhere, and I don't know, that to her signified that this was going to happen. And Adib was so fretful after his election. How has this happened? You know, he was a counselor in Europe. He wasn't all over the world. He was there. And he loved doing what he was doing, didn't want to do anything else. And I remember we went to the first time all of the new house members went to the shrine of Baha'u'llah together. And he was still fretting. And we went in, and there was a whole series of prayers. And we came out, and he was looking serene again. And he came, he said, "It's all right." He said, "I realized when I was there that Baha'u'llah himself was a prisoner in the Holy Land." with all seriousness. And that proved true. In a sense, all those friends that are captured there are prisoners in the Holy Land, but they're prisoners with Baha'u'llah, not and of Baha'u'llah. So, in the last days, he was, and the other thing is, he was found to have cancer probably a year before he passed away. It was a difficult state of cancer. I never did hear the details. He never mentioned to the House of Justice that he was sick. He kept on with his work until he couldn't anymore. And obviously his wife knew, his children didn't know, his colleagues in the House didn't know. One other woman, the wife of Glenford Mitchell, who was a nurse and knew about the hospital proceeding, was taking care of his medical visits and so on. So he came to a state where he was in his last stages. He was in a hospital, and he'd been there, was having to be there. This is so shortly after Ruhiya Khanum's passing, as a succession. She passed away, and then within 2 weeks, he passed away. At the time, I was in bed with double pneumonia, too. The House of Justice sent a message through one of its members that said, "It's not your time. You stay out of this business of dying," The Ronnie Tarzadeh, Mr. Tarzadeh's son, told me that in the last days he was with Adib in the room with his father, just keeping vigil there with him because people were busy. They'd come and go, visitors would come, but there wasn't someone there all the time. So he stayed there with him, and he said in those last couple of days he would see Adib in this hospital bed position, propped up a bit, he'd see his eyes dilate huge and realize something when he was experiencing something, and would be overwhelmed, feel that there was something was happening. And then after a time that would pass. And then Adi would be conscious again and talking and telling. And he said, this happened a couple of times, and then Adi mentioned to him, he said, they've come, they've all come. The Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi said, they all came and they say, we're waiting for you, we're waiting for you. Imagine. It's a nice welcoming party, I'm sure. There's a story told by Elizabeth Cheney, one of the early Baha'is and pioneers and travel teachers. She said that Mabel Ives, Howard Colby Ives, told her this story. Howard Colby Ives' wife, his widow, told her. He said Howard was in his last stages, difficult. He was blind by that time. He had a nervous disease that gave him constant pain in his whole body. She said, it was just, and it was a test for her as well as Howard was, there. He's sick, and people would still come, and he would speak lovingly to them through this fog of his pain and his blindness. By the way, this couple, there's a letter from the Guardian that praises them and says that, there's a great wisdom in you living out of your car. They were travel teachers, and they lived out of their car. And they went and they'd work as dishwashers in hotels and different things during the day, and then they'd have firesides at night as if they were living a normal life, And that was the way they proceeded to help open the whole Midwest of the United States. They went so many places. Well, terrific thing. So Mabel went in the other room at one of these occasions when her husband was so pained and hurting, and she turned to the master and she said, can't you take him? Does he really need to stay longer? Can't you take him? And she prayed, and she became calm again about it. And a little later she went into the room, and Howard was all excited. He said, Mabel, the master came. I saw him, he was there, and he said to me, if you want to go now, I will take you. You can go. You can come. But he said, if you linger a bit longer, it will be better, because I'm preparing you to be a professor in the University of the Kingdom. He said, okay, I'll stay for a while longer. He was a wonderful Baha'i teacher, the things he prepared, all kinds of courses and things. Marvelous. Anyway. He encouraged Nancy Phillips. Some of you may have met Nancy Phillips. She was on the original board, auxiliary board in America, lived in Phoenix, and she had been deepened in the faith to some degree by Howard Colby Ives on the East Coast. She married a non-Baha'i, a physician, and he got a job in Phoenix, so they came to Phoenix. Phoenix didn't have any Baha'i community at that time, way back. And he wrote a series of letters to her to encourage her to keep on her Baha'i studies and so on. And he talked about his own approach to Baha'i studies. One of the granddaughter, I think, is it? The granddaughter is writing a biography of great-granddaughter is writing a biography, and some of these letters that I know Nancy handed over will probably be included in that volume, so we'll eventually see it. And he said that he studied as much as he could, and he had notebooks on all kinds of different Baha'i themes, because there was no computers in those days. I mean, everything was handwritten, and he wrote the notes and kept notes about different subjects, the soul, about life after death, about unity of mankind, all these things. He said, I have 25 such notebooks that I keep. And he said that you need to commune with the words of God, with the writings. And he suggested to start with 2 hours a day of study of the writings and taking notes and paying attention to what those parts that are more meaningful to you, because that will lead you to the things you need to understand. And he suggested that at least once a day you have a place where you sit down and you think of Baha'u'llah sitting in front of you. You're sitting here and he's sitting there. And you talk with him about these things that you've read and studied. He said, if it's easier, think of Jesus, but know that they're listening, that they can hear, and address them. And gradually, he said, your capacity to study will increase, and you'll be able to study more hours a day. Well, so if she did that, she lives as a heavenly soul. She was one of the first really gifted teachers amongst the Navajos and the Hopi Indians, and she gave the message even to the chiefs finally. That's another story about how much we need to be looking at the writings and how our lack of practice, or that it's not very popular these days to spend that much time looking at the text, how important it is. Because the character of everything we do depends on the degree to which we absorb the light of the kingdom. The light of the kingdom is in the verses. And the verses are the source of that transformation of consciousness that we spoke about earlier, that makes all the difference in if you're going to be effective as a teacher. You can teach, but you won't always be effective, as some people complain. Nobody's interested. Yes, they're not interested in what you know. Okay, evanescence of this world. The difference of degree is a barrier. You've noticed that. We can't really truly visualize the next world. You've read those notes, I think. Right on, it seems to be right on the theme that we're addressing here. Baha'u'llah, in the Hidden Words, he says, "Be not content with the ease of a passing day, and deprive not thyself of everlasting rest. Barter not the garden of eternal delight for the dust heap of a mortal world. Up from the prison ascend unto the glorious meads above, and from thy mortal cage wing thy flight unto the paradise of the placeless." Friends, I don't think this is a description of the going from here to the afterlife. I think these are things Baha'u'llah is saying should happen while we're alive. There's enough indications here that says, if you have not attained everlasting life while you're living here, you're not going to have it when you get there. And just that much longer before we don't know the measure of the mercy of God that will encompass souls that haven't made much effort along the way. We just don't know. The life of this world is a series of confused dreams. This is a tablet from Abdu'l-Baha. Neither it nor its happiness have any value or significance. Again, he says, the days spent in this life are like a mirage. The existence of the creatures therein is illusory, without foundation and non-existent. Oh. I seem to be seeing you and experiencing this meeting here together. We hope it has a higher meaning because most of it's illusory. It's very strange, he's so strong in this. And yet we cling to it. And we squeeze it for fun. Everybody's interested in fun. Did you have fun this weekend? Did you have fun? That fun is the no afterlife, That's really what it is. That fun is really supposed to be in the afterlife. That's where you want to have the fun. Here, accept whatever you can that will. And I mentioned earlier about this strange thing Abdu'l-Baha says. Strange, he says, that I rejoice in your sufferings. Because it's the best thing for the soul. He says that the light of the soul is, you could liken it to a ship. If it's like a ship, he said, the waves, huge tumultuous waves pounding down on it, are the best thing that can happen to it. The safest passage that it will get to where it needs to get. And sometimes we complain sometimes. Too much suffering. I have too much suffering in this world. Too many sadnesses. And some souls are broken because they don't know how to turn that The example of it for us, the whole pattern of how to draw out of the sufferings the right response, is to see Baha'u'llah. And I think this is the reason Shoghi Effendi's translated so many of the meditations of Baha'u'llah and prayers and meditations. You know, we have prayers and meditations. A lot of friends don't pay any attention to it, but look at it. This is one of those key books that Shoghi Effendi felt should be translated, compiled and translated for the friends. And he says that through it they can draw close to Baha'u'llah. And I remember for years I would open the prayers and meditations, which is kind of overwhelming in its organization because you don't know where anything is for a long time. And you find a prayer, and I start reading that prayer. Oh God, thou seest me shut up in my prison. Oh no, but this is not for me. No, I'm not in the prison house. And then I'd look for another prayer. Those prayers are there to show us the proper responses of servitude in this world, of the way the manifestation serves God and the attitude that creates in him, and how we view the sufferings and difficulties that we have. Because nobody has suffered. You will rehearse your own difficulties. Look at the sufferings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, for example. Nobody has suffered like that, except them. Why does God allow that? This has some meaning, especially when you look at it in the light of mirage and illusory and nothing. The most meaningful thing is that you should be turning to your Maker. He talks about the souls that pray and ask for help. They are the object of the spears of the kingdom and the thunderbolts of the dominion on high. Bash, 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 bash. Because this self takes a lot to knock it out. And if that gets knocked out, then you become one of those pure instruments that serves God in all the worlds of God. The reward, the eternal reward, is immense, beyond anything we can imagine. So yet, a little patience, a little Job-like character, holding on through the sufferings and things that we have. Impatience with non-communication with the spiritual realities of life. Impatience with ourselves. There's one place Abdu'l-Baha says that the love of God is dependent on hate of self. Now, I think we are rational and we balance that with some other quotations, but the point is that the self of God, there's two kinds of self. We're talking about the self, which is this lower animal qualities, all the animal qualities that are in us. And then there's the self of God freed from that, that's the mirror, the image and likeness of the names and attributes of God. One's here, and we're moving along. And I think, I felt like the yo-yo going. Sometimes you feel like you're going up, and then it's going down, and then up and down. And I don't know why we have that, but I remember from the beginning wanting to get to the end of the goal quickly. There's no quick path, But what I did find is that as we go up and down, I think we can all perceive this, that we're moving up, but we move up and down as we move up, so we fall back. And a wonderful passage where Abdu'l-Baha is saying that when we move from stage to stage in spiritual development, it's as if we have become accustomed to the degree of light that God is showering us. At first, it blinds us, the new stage. And oftentimes when he gives us a new degree of vision, with which then we do see our lower self in a clearer manner, we think we've gone backwards. Actually, we're moving forward. But then we become accustomed to that. Then he sends us a new degree. And actually his light, at first we may take it as a punishment. Actually, it's a blessing because it's detaching us. It's freeing us to embrace the truths of the faith in a new way. Another tablet that's it's published in Persian but not in English. You have asked whether or not there are occupations and distractions in the divine world, the luminous realm of the kingdom of God. And he says that world is sanctified from the characteristics conditions and concomitants of this mode of existence. But we do have service. We know that. You pray in the Tablet of Ahmad, a service in both worlds. What they've asked about that. What's this service? I think that I was mentioning this, that diffusing the fragrances of God, Abdu'l Baha says, is the way teaching is referred to in the next realm. Obviously, you've got a continuum of people who haven't heard of the faith, people who have heard a little bit of the faith, people who are progressing, Baha'is who haven't quite made the grade, and then you have these other souls who are assigned to help. Their occupation is to help lift them, to inspire them, and so on. And you remember I was saying, he said he's been in some district with wonderful new foods, fruits, and to imagine that the next world is going to be very different looking from this, I don't think is a sensible thing. I think we need to think of it's just you've stepped from this world to that world. As the master told the old man at the museum in Natural History in New York, who was a Jewish man, a little bit seemed apprehensive of death. And he said, I don't know how to face this. And Abdu'l Baha said, look, your museum has 2 floors. Death is going from the first floor to the second floor, same thing. Oh, he said, I understand. And Juliet Thompson said she went back to see the man after to teach him the faith, and they said, he didn't come anymore. We think he's passed on. O ye loved ones of God, know ye that the world is even like as a mirage rising over the sands, that the thirsty mistaketh for water, but it's not satisfying. How many of you have been on some super vacation you looked forward to for ages, and when you actually had the vacation, it was kind of empty and meaningless, except you got a little rest maybe. I have made death a messenger of joy to thee. Wherefore dost thou grieve? I made the light to shed on thee its splendor. Why dost thou veil thyself therefrom? We've got to figure out how to remove the veils. And none of us knows when the oil in the lamp is going to finish. With some, it happens very young. Children pass away. It's mysterious, We are the chosen ones in the sense that we've grown up in this world. The majority of souls that come into existence at the point of conception, the majority of the souls go on right away to the next world. Think of there's all kinds of laws and things related to that, to their training. The innocent children, Abdu'l Baha says, will be trained in the schools of the kingdom. You'll meet them fully developed. You saw this account he told the lady, you'll see your daughter fully grown. In the near-death experiences, people say that they saw the children that they'd lost were there to greet them on the other side. Grown, radiant, spiritual. What a blessing, huh? We can get pretty screwed up in the local school system, but on that side, things are much more healthy. There's this passage from the Gleanings, I don't know if that was in the other one, where it says, certain fruits indeed attain their fullest development only after being severed from the tree. There's some fruit stays green in the supermarket forever, but there's others that get sweeter and sweeter as it's after it's been picked. So we don't know exactly the mysteries of all that. I wanted to introduce again this idea that when Abdu'l Baha talks about evolution, the development of the life of the spirit goes through the mineral kingdom and the vegetable kingdom and the animal kingdom, and it reaches man, and then man has his own development. He says that the development of the human species is parallel to the development of the embryo in the womb until it reaches maturity. So if there was a time when human beings had tails, let us say, that also in the embryo there was a time when the embryo had a tail. This is things that over He tells us that human beings have inhabited this earth for numerous cycles, millions of years. There have been human beings on this planet, and at the end of those cycles, there's a general obliteration of the traces, and that's why we don't know, for the most part, anything about those previous stages. It's so mysterious. But the end of evolution, he says, is bringing into being the human species. And in another place, he says that if a planet, you can liken a planet to a human being, the head of that human being, of that planet, is the human species. The whole reason it exists is to bring conscious, rational souls into being that can remember and worship God and prepare themselves to go to the next kingdom. So you see, the pattern is universal, according to the writings of Abdu'l-Baha. It's very interesting to see. People think, oh, if they're more evolved, will they have horns, or will they have this, or will they have that? I don't think so. Image and likeness of God is not a physical image and likeness of God, and yet everything, all the images, all the forms of everything are not accidental. They are part of the plan of God, and they appear from the realms of the Spirit, and they impress themselves upon submissive matter, physical matter, and become the expression of that. So I think the fact that people see the manifestation in human form, the fact that they see the manifestation in visions in the human form, would suggest the human form transcends the evolutionary accidents of planet Earth. It's something that is much more universal in character. And if we're going to have higher unities, we're told this is the last stage of unity of the planet, is the world unity that Baha'u'llah has brought, that Bab and Baha'u'llah have released, the potential for the unification of mankind. He says this is the highest degree of social evolution on this planet. Mr. Alinga said, Shoghi Effendi spoke to him openly. He said, about the future there will be a prophet who will come to unite the planets of the solar system. Anything beyond that, he said, that seems pretty far for us, but anything beyond that, he said, the human species will have to conform much closer to the realities of divine love before they will discover the means for moving at more distance. Now, we've had knowledge on this planet of little by little we found out. I mean, in Christ's time, the earth was flat. Heaven was up, hell was down. It was pretty simple to figure out. That we will have contact with other planets, but we won't necessarily have unity with them. But no, I don't think it's going to be a problem. Mr. Olinga said that Shoghi Effendi told him that Abdu'l-Baha said several times that this planet is the hell of the planets, the most backward of them all. Yeah, and Mr. Olinga said, I was a little startled, and Shoghi Effendi riveted me. He said, they still make war. Here we have a merciful God that creates this beautiful physical realm, inhabitants with lovely human beings, who then proceed to destroy each other. What in the world? Anything more backward than that can you think of? When Abdu'l-Baha talks about the oneness of mankind, as taught by Baha'u'llah, he says he wants us to see that the whole planet is a mercy from God, a compassion. He's given us a beautiful world to live in. He's given us intelligence. He's given us the teachings of the prophets to organize the civilizations here, the society, to be fair and equitable with everyone. That's the goal. We're at the opposite end of the spectrum right now. We have to move through all of that. But it will happen. A golden age is coming. The oneness of mankind will be realized, he says, and then a whole series of prophets will appear to enhance and develop further that. And all of that, of course, is a reflection, he says, of the perfections and beauties of the realm on high. The two worlds, because of Baha'u'llah, will draw closer, he says. The conditions of that world will be reflected, Shoghi Effendi describes that, Abdu'l-Baha in a tablet actually says, will affect this world. Now, we're talking about the possibility of communication face-to-face of everybody whenever they want to, which seems to me a condition of the other world from what we understand. Then there's another stage at which we hear that in the next world, there are angels and they're flying around. Okay, flight is a definite element that we associate with the next world. And think how since the coming of Baha'u'llah, we're all flying around the whole planet all the time now, coming and going. Okay, we can only do it to the degree of what can happen in the material world, but still it's a reflection of those things. You've seen the tablet of Baha'u'llah, the tablet of wisdom. He talks about the fact that when he needs to see literature or knowledge of the past, he sees it on a tablet before his vision. And Abdu'l-Baha, they took him to Schenectady, New York, to the General Electric laboratories. And they were there, the entourage was there, moving, and Steinmetz, the great electrical genius, was guiding them through the General Electric's laboratories and trying to explain in a simple way what they were doing. And he said, one of our problems is this and this. And they translated for Abdu'l-Baha, and Abdu'l-Baha said, tell him that if he applies this principle to that, he'll solve his problem. They tell him that. He was leading the group, then Abdu'l-Baha was leading the group, and he was following, who is this man? How is the greatest genius, electrical genius? He solved the greatest problem. So when they came out, Wafakini asked Abdu'l-Baha, in the group of Baha'is, he asked Abdu'l-Baha, do you know everything? And Abdu'l-Baha said, no. He said, but whatever I need to know, I see on a tablet before my eyes. Now, along the same principle of drawing from that world these patterns into this world, most of you are playing with Wikipedia these days. You have endless knowledge on a tablet before your sight. This is not identical, but certainly this is a reflection and part of the advance of that. Very interesting how these could have imagined that in the early 1800s. Such a thing would happen, that you'd have a tablet where you could see things all over the world and immediately have the news and have the knowledge and have all the books of all the authors of all times, all the great classics and everything. Everything's right at hand. It's really such an assistance, such a wonder. And that's just the beginning, Abdu'l-Baha says. We don't know what else is coming. Now we have in medicine the possibilities of making replacement organs for all kinds of problems. Maybe we will get to this stage where the oil runs out of our lamp, rather than having it accidentally snuffed out by some problem earlier on in our lives because of whatever. Bad nutrition? We don't know. Definitely after death, the soul passes through numerous stations of existence. And Shoghi Effendi affirms its progress is thus infinite. Pretty hard for us to figure out what eternity is in those terms, but we are investing like children invest in a period of education. Depending on the quality of their education, the outcome of the quality of their life will depend on it. Simple example. Depending on the quality of our spiritual regeneration in this world, the quality of life for all of eternity is dependent after we leave here. What about those people that haven't heard about the faith? Did you have some readings about that? You did in the collection that we handed out. Let me read a few more here. Those souls who are not vivified and attracted by the Holy Spirit are counted among the dead, because their souls are deprived of the breath of the Holy Spirit. And these persons, after physical death, are in a certain condition, having feeling and discernment in their environment. But in comparison with pure souls who have been vivified by the Holy Spirit, they are dead and deprived. So they live in an imagination, a world of their own, but totally separated from the reality of what the prophets of God bring for us. Those who have never had an opportunity, Shoghi Effendi says, of hearing of the faith, but who have lived good lives, will no doubt be treated with the greatest love and mercy in the next world. and reap their full reward. I think most of the near-death experiences, from the little that I've read about the subject, were people who were trying to live good lives. And they received this blessed encounter, if you will, in the experience that they had. But the people who don't live very well don't recount their near-death experiences. Some of them have them, and some of them are mum about it, about how difficult it was to realize just in what a bad position they were because of their inhumanity, you know. Relatives of the believers, a tablet, this is a letter from Shoghi Effendi, with reference to Baha'u'llah's tablet in which he says that all the relatives of believers will reach the kingdom in the other world. By this is meant only partial attainment. They can, however, progress indefinitely, as spiritual progress in the other world is limitless and is not confined to those who have attained unto the knowledge and recognition of the cause while still in this world. From Abdu'l-Baha, it's certain and established that the human reality will continue to acquire perfections and to make progress in all the worlds of God. This is why the holy books enjoin the performance of good works and charitable deeds on behalf of a soul after its ascension. These good works and charitable deeds cause it to advance in spiritual degrees. Thus it is evident that human progress, that is, the acquisition of the divine perfections and the unlimited bounties, is possible in every world. Shoghi Effendi says, the Master has told us that gifts and good deeds done in memory of those who have passed on are most helpful to the development of their souls in the realms beyond. Okay? Pray for them as they pray for you is a statement that's in the original old Baha'u'llah in the New Era that we have. There's a statement in the Gleanings, no man can obtain everlasting life unless he embraceth the truth of this inestimable, this wondrous and sublime revelation. They've written Shoghi Effendi about this, you know. And he says, as to this passage, no man can attain everlasting life, should not be taken literally. By everlasting life is meant spiritual felicity, communion with the divine spirit. But all souls have perpetuity of existence. The soul doesn't disappear, it isn't destroyed, but its condition can be very lowly, and compared to those with the life of the kingdom, like a dead thing, or, as he says, the mineral. They remain in a state like comparable to the mineral kingdom here with respect to us, unconscious of the higher realms. Again, they asked Abdu'l-Baha, the house inquired about the influence of evil souls. Evil souls, he says, are deprived of eternal life. So how can they exercise any influence? And again, eternal life here is not the continuation of existence, but that state of being in which the soul receives the spirit of faith, the breath of the Holy Spirit, and has that as its life and its vitality. Shoghi Effendi also writes, he says, we believe that God's mercy exceeds his justice, and that through the repentance of a soul, the prayers and supplications of other souls, and the goodness of God, even a person who has passed away in great spiritual darkness can be forgiven, educated spiritually in the next world, and progress. Very hopeful promise with friends or relatives that we may have had who didn't seem to progress very much before they left this life. Oh, I think you've seen this. You will retain your individuality, will not be swallowed up in one spirit. That's on a tablet of the Master. Here's a very interesting one, and actually I find it beneficial in terms of there being no women on the House of Justice. Is that because women have a lesser station than men? Is that some of the imagination of the people? Abdu'l-Baha says, know thou that sex, or in present day parlance, gender, male or female, relates to the exigencies of the physical world and has no relation or connection with the spirits. The spirit and its worlds are purged from these conditions and sanctified from all similitude to the bodies in this contingent world. He goes on in another chapter to say that being a male or a female is an accident of the moment of conception. The soul either becomes male or female in its expression in this world, so that there's no hierarchical difference. They have a difference in functions in life. And one of the differences has been that they don't serve on the House of Justice, but another is that they're the first trainers of the human race. They're the mothers of us all. So that there are things there that are quite mysterious, but that doesn't perpetuate itself. And we've seen how women have exceeded men, at least in the West. The women in the East didn't have a chance to exceed anything because they were shut in their houses and they couldn't get out, for the most part. I mean, you all the male believers, the apostles of Baal are all men, except we have the case of Tahir, who was quite exceptional with the Bab. But the Master, he has a mix of women and men, and then since then we've had these great women serving the cause in a magnificent way. Women occupying positions higher than the members of the House of Justice as hands of the cause of God, perpetuated forever in their positions. The greatest holy leaf herself. It's interesting sometimes, because people just reduce it to this last, well, there's where the power is, Friends, there's where the suffering is too. I know Mr. Simple used to say, maybe it's the mercy of God that he's excused women from serving on the House of Justice. Maybe it's a compassion on God's part. We don't know what's going to happen. This House of Justice is going to be the center of, when Abdu'l-Baha says the whole world is either going to follow or oppose the faith. And they're going to do that a long time before the Baha'is are the majority. So what kind of attacks is the House of Justice and the cause and the Baha'is? There was a pilgrim couple that went in, I think it was about 1955. They said they met with the Guardian, at the table, and they were talking and about the families and so on. And they said that we're doing homeschooling. They're from the United States. We're doing homeschooling with our children. He said, well done, he said, because in the future, Baha'i children won't be allowed in school. He's talking to Americans. We don't know what's coming, Difficulties can arise. I don't know how soon. We don't seem to be moving fast enough to cause that kind of opposition yet. Hopefully you'll all become spiritually ablaze and go out and change the world, which is quite a possibility too. You all know about pilgrim notes. You can't trust them. But you can listen to them. And I think they're much more interesting than the evening news or than some other things you could bother yourself with. So, what about the influence of souls in the other worlds? You saw that you had this passage where, know the truth that if a soul of man walked in the ways of God, it will assuredly return and be gathered to the glory of the beloved, and that these souls who've remained faithful and steadfast will be possessed of such power that all the worlds which the Almighty hath created can benefit through them. What a promise. A tablet of Abdu'l-Baha says, the human world is unaware of the world of the kingdom and utterly uninformed thereof. The souls of the kingdom, however, exert an influence upon the world of man. Observe how many difficult problems have been and are being unraveled, even though most of the learned and great minds of the world are completely unaware of this influence. These scoffers, in fact, are in the company of souls during contemplation. But a heavenly individual is cognizant of the divine world. His inner eyes are open. He is detached from the world of nature and endowed with a spiritual power. He is aware of the divine world and the world of the souls. The reality of the soul is immaterial, not material, and it hath no spatial or temporal qualities, and occupieth no place. As far as I can see, what's being said here is that the thinkers, the inventors, and everything, they're inspired by souls surrounding them. when they're thinking, they share common understandings of things. But he says these scoffers, they don't even know, they don't realize where they're getting their information from. But spiritual, heavenly individuals, they will be aware of it. And you should be assured that, I think that you have angelic company when you're meditating on the words of God. You're trying to understand and penetrate it. They want you to understand too. They may be helping. The effusion of holy souls who are blessed with eternal life exists in all the worlds of God. After their ascension, holy souls are endowed with a tremendous spiritual power and are able to release vast outpourings of grace. Wondrous signs are appointed in the world and within yourselves. Whatever is presented to the mind, this is the discovery of man himself, which deriveth and emanateth from the grace of holy souls. That's pretty. When in that state he becometh abstracted from himself and immersed in the sea of contemplation, a spiritual state, sanctified from the body and anything physical, will appear in his mind. Now, in Paris Talks, there's a talk at the very end of the book about meditation. Go and look for that one. It's very interesting because we're told we should, as Baha'is, meditate on the verses and things we read. And that gives a very interesting picture of what meditation is, how important it is, how to engage in it. Again, back to the words of Baha'u'llah from the Gleanings, such a soul provideth at the bidding of the ideal king and divine educator the pure leaven that leaveneth the world of being, and furnisheth the power through which the arts and wonders of the world are made manifest. Consider how meal needeth leaven to be leavened with. Those souls who are the symbols of detachment are the leaven of the world. Meditate on this and be of the thankful. Meditate on all of this and be of the thankful. Well, I hope that this rehearsal of study of these tablets and these writings has awakened a thirst in us to penetrate more, to understand more. It leads to a revival of careful study, delving into the Baha'i writings, so that we will be more equipped and be able to be of greater influence to the people that will ask us, Baha'i, what's that? That's the magic moment, We all brace ourselves for it. That's the one you pray about in the morning, that when it happens, you'll not say, blah, 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 hard. It's very difficult. We've all had that experience, right? Or somebody, you start off with a really intense explanation and they say, I'm not interested, I'm just curious. Oh. I mistook you for a waiting soul. All right, friends, I don't know. I think we're going to have to leave these questions for your meditation and further study. There's some of the familiar suspects in here. Why no women on the House of Justice, and why this and why that? So I can't answer all that. I wish I could. They're saying with respect to that and with respect to the present movement about rights for gay marriage and so on, what about the House of Justice? Under the influence and pressure of the whole Baha'i world, can't they change this approach? Friends, they can't do it. They're bound by the teachings. They're not an interpreter. They're the legislator. Whatever hasn't been stated specifically, they can deal with, but they can't. They can apply the teachings. But this is something that maybe is going to attract attention to the faith. First in a bad way, but then maybe ultimately in a better way. We don't know the mystery of all of this. But we do know we have to be compassionate with everybody. And we do know that we don't have to, as a community, stand for certain activities in civil society. That's not our business. We're not a political party. We don't enter into them as political issues. Let the people arrange their affairs the way they want to arrange them. That's all right. We're busy teaching the faith. For Baha'is, we have certain standards that we want to uphold. But we're not trying to impose those on society. You know? We don't go around preaching that nobody should drink. It's against the law of God. We don't do that. We teach the faith in a general way. They'll finally get, if they are attracted to it, they'll see what the standards that God wants for the Baha'is and for the people are, and then they can be shared. This one last story, I remember we were in a meeting in Peru, in Lima, Peru, with the hand of the cause, Dr. Mohajir. And he had given this short 20-minute presentation of the faith, which was the freshest, most exciting thing I'd ever heard at the moment. He was just, because he was moving for the cause, he was full of all kinds of fresh vision and inspiration. He gave this talk. The whole place was, that kind of creamy silence that happens when the faith has been well delivered. So they were there, and the chairman of the NSA came over to me. I was doing the translation for the hand, and said, will he receive any questions? So I asked him his questions. He said, all right. Nothing needed to be asked, but okay. So the chairman announced that there would be questions. Does anybody have a question? One guy kind of plumped down, an older fellow down in the front row with a big red nose. He said, what about wine? I didn't even want to translate the question. Poor Dr. Mohajir. So I said to Dr. Mohajir, the question is, what about wine? And he said, that's an excellent question. He said, the Baha'i teachings are filled with references to wine. In all the major books, you'll see references to it. And he said that it's the wine of the love of God, the wine of knowledge, the wine of this, the wine of that. There's all these wonderful wines we have in the Baha'i teachings. And he said, if ever you taste that wine, you won't want the other kind. Thank you, friends.